We're delighted to be joined now by our next guest, a gentleman who has got so much to say, Reform Party MP, former chairman of Southampton Football Club. They haven't started great. Rupert Lowe, a very good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Talk Drive. How are you?
Afternoon, Jeremy. How are you?
Well, I'm all right. I have to get in about the Southampton. That's not going very well, is it?
They've won yet, have they?
No.
And they've conceded rather too many goals. I think that's it's a bit disappointing, but hopefully there's time yet. They're not too far into the season.
Good, Rupert.
Not unusual for the Saints to start slowly.
No, I agree with you there, my friend, and I hope they keep faith with that young manager. I think he could be a good thing. Rupert, so much to talk about. We're going to talk about the channel crossings and that, if you're okay. If you don't want to say whatever, I just wanted your response. You're a Reform MP. We've had response all afternoon to the Hugh Edwards judgment. 6 months suspended. And I have to tell you, the very people who I think are up in arms about politics in general and perhaps turned to Reform because they couldn't believe what's happening to our country are up in arms this afternoon, Rupert, that a gentleman who is essentially watching this sort of stuff is walking free. And the organisation that we're all forced to pay our licence fee into continue to pay this man for 6 months and he'll get a golden pension. For a lot of working class men and women, this is disgusting.
Well, I think, my views on the BBC, Jeremy, are very often voiced on my social media. I think it's now a malign monopoly and it needs to be basically thrown open to the will of the people. If they want to subscribe for it, it should be voluntary. And they should stand on their own 2 feet. I think monopolies like them now, it's not working for the country. They are woke in the extreme, and I think they paint the wrong picture for the entire sort of British population. With regard to Hugh Edwards, I mean, as you know, they've got a track record of picking wrong uns. Hugh Edwards was a darling of the BBC for a very long time. And to me, I thought today when I heard the judgment, to send people to prison for a tweet and to effectively give him a suspended sentence, which is effectively what this is, which means he won't serve any time. His pension will be kept intact. They paid him, as you say, beyond what was reasonable. It's quite extraordinary, frankly, but I think they're guilty of many bad decisions, and this is another one.
I mean, really interesting message, actually.
The judge seems to get it wrong as well, but they seem to get it wrong quite a lot too.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Robin Poole, actually, they're really interesting. He said, I stupidly decided, Jez, please tell this to Rupert, to watch a bit of the BBC News this morning. Just as Yvette Cooper came on to be interviewed, I couldn't believe what a soft ride they gave her. She was allowed to avoid the question every time and just spout her pre-rehearsed blurb, and not once were any of her facts questioned. I nearly threw my coffee at the television. Don't worry, I'm back with you now. But really, I do question, and many people would agree with this, the BBC in its entirety. And I find it astonishing that a paedophile is allowed to walk the streets. I mean, it's just the optics of it, whether it's the justice system, Rupert, whether it's the judge, whether it's... I don't know. This man looked at images of young children and a woman who dared to post something on Facebook that was profoundly wrong. I would have thought would be the perfect vehicle to put her in a course to explain about what's going on in the world. She's doing 15 months. A man who insulted a police dog or shouted at it and made a racist comment is serving 20 months. That is 2-tier by anybody's standards, isn't it?
Two-tier. We have two-tier, policing. We have a two-tier justice system. So this is confirmation of it.
Unbelievable. Let's move on to something that is, when I say close to your heart, something you've spoken about, and all the Reform MPs. We had Richard on last week. We had Nigel on the week before. Yet more people sadly dying in channel crossings at the weekend. 8, another 800 coming over. We watched the debacle that was the Tory party promise Rwanda. We watched Labour sweep to power, promising to deal with the gangs and create a czar who still hasn't got a job. And yet now we find Starmageddon's heading off to Italy, where he's having a meeting with, I mean, she's a right-wing prime minister of a far-right group, Giorgia Meloni. And their idea, the Italian thing, is to, which is, by the way, if you're just tuning in, I mean, this is genius. Not. They're going to go to Albania, where Italian civil servants are going to go to Albania and interview immigrants. And if they've got a case, they can go back to Italy. And if they haven't, they've got to bugger off home. The difference with Rwanda was apparently you would be interviewed not by... Anyway, you'd stay in Rwanda whether you were good or bad. I don't understand, Rupert, right? You and Richard, for example, in the Reform Party have led and made successful businesses work. How is it in this country that whatever seeming political party is in power has absolutely no idea to deal with? Why don't you train 1,000 people, create a holding pen, or not holding pen, that'll be, you know what I mean, an area, make deals with countries, right, and say, you're not coming here, turn the boats back. Why is it so difficult?
I think, Jeremy, it's really very simple, as I've said many times. The Australians had this problem and they solved it.
Yeah.
And actually, the quickest way to save lives is to have a zero tolerance policy, as the Australians did, to return people immediately, to make it quite clear that if you come illegally, you will never, ever settle here legally, and that if you want to settle here, you have to apply legally. As we know, most of these are young men. 87% of them, I think, by the Home Office's own figures, are young men. It's not as if it's families or, people say they're fleeing war-torn areas. They're not. They're coming through safe countries. So these are economic migrants, and we're a soft touch. I think it is soluble, but we need the will to solve it, as you say. The problem we've got now is that we have a Prime Minister who is a human rights lawyer. Human rights law and the ECHR is embedded in his DNA. He made his living from human rights law. And rather like sort of putting the fox in the chicken coop and expecting him to tend them, I think it's unlikely to think that Keir Starmer is going to do anything other than make the situation worse. The difference between us and Giorgia Meloni, of course, is she's still in the EU. We are not. The British people, 17.4 million of them, voted to take back our own sovereign borders. And any responsible government should be doing just that. I think you and I know most of the problems in the country now come from unsustainable legal and illegal immigration. And it's almost as if our government since 97, I blame Blair to start with, he started he opened the floodgates. The Tories singularly failed to stop it. And at the end of the day, that is the root cause of most of the problems that we've got across the country. But I'll tell you why you're right on so many levels. I mean, first of all, you comment about, so I never get this. I mean, I've said it many times and been frowned at by many. If I was escaping a war-torn country, here's two things I'd do. If I was escaping a war, I'd take my wife and kids with me. Wouldn't I? Correct.
Of course I would.
Correct.
If I was escaping a war-torn country for my life, the first country I stepped foot in that was safe and not at war, I'd stay. But they come to Great Britain because we are soft. We are soft in almost every single way. And I think people, Rupert sort of swallowed it, put it on the back burner for many, many years. But, in the past, one couldn't mention the word immigration for fear of being called racist. But I think that whether it's the cost of living crisis, whether it's COVID, whatever, British people are really struggling. I was telling the team here, I went to Newcastle 3 weeks ago, just with a mate. We're at a box, we're watching Newcastle. There are 12 men, they're all working class men. We're talking about the Labour Party. They all voted Reform and said the Labour Party isn't the working class for it because they're too busy making sure they don't offend people. And whether it's the ECHR or what we believe is our humane right or not, whichever government's in power needs to listen to the will of the British people, because the British people have had enough of working hard. I had a guy on the other day, Rupert, and he said, I don't know what to do, Jez. I'm 55. I've never broken the law. I've never had a lot of money. I've never asked for jack. I've brought my kids up. And you know what? I feel like a fifth-rate citizen in the United Kingdom. And a lot of people feel like that. They genuinely do.
Well, I don't blame him. I agree, and it's bizarre. It's almost as if the government and the civil service are encouraging mass immigration, both legal and illegal.
Well, I think the civil service have their own agenda, don't you?
But I do think the point that we should make is, as you say, you raised Rwanda. Rwanda is very, very relevant to this. I mean, whilst I never thought Rwanda was the answer to all our problems, at least if you were coming to this country as an economic migrant, there was a danger that your name came up and you ended up not in the UK, but in Africa. So it did actually act as a deterrent. And to abandon it, it would be, I think, cruel justice on the British people having spent all that money if the Germans then adopted the scheme, which we have effectively paid for.
And I interviewed Tony Abbott. You talked about the Australians, and I interviewed Tony Abbott for a show on television about a year and a half ago, and people... he made the point, which I think is amazing, that when they brought it in, the world recoiled in horror. And then they held this referendum, and the Australian people said, well, we don't sort of like the optics of it, but, you know, we're struggling. We're struggling with the health service. We're struggling with education. Albanese takes over, the Labour Party. They've kept it going. I think that countries should be able... No, actually, all these people say to me, well, we need to show the world we're good. No, we need to show our own people that we care about them first and foremost. I mean, if there's surely, if you've paid in, surely, like pensioners, if all your life you've done the right thing and you think, right, so I'm going to be cold this winter, and yet that scumbag's committed a crime, been let out of prison and is now in a 4-star hotel. What does that say about our country?
Well, as I say, Australia have shown us the way it worked in Australia. It stopped the deaths, and that would be the issue here. I mean, you mentioned the pensioners. I mean, I thought the decision to take the winter fuel allowance away from the pensioners was bizarre in the extreme.
Just extraordinary.
Particularly when Labour's own research showed that up to 4,000 people might die in a cold winter. And these are people who paid into the country, into the system, into the state pension all their lives. I think we all know that the state pension, Jeremy, is a fraud. It's a put-and-take scheme, and I think the government knows that ultimately, when the baby boomers start to retire in earnest, there's not going to be enough people to pay in because it's put and take, as I say. It's not as if there's a fund to pay for it.
Listen, you look at what Ken Dodd did, and I would never condone that. But the pension is going to be worthless in years to come. It's like I hate the fact that we don't stick up for our veterans, we don't stick up for our pensioners, and then you're an MP now, and optics are supposed to be, you know, all important. And you guys from Reform put yourself out here. People from all sorts of parties. Some of them do, some of them don't. But you know, I watched the Labour thing, right, Rupert, and I thought the first 5 or 6 weeks was OK. I thought it looked OK, bearing in mind the debacle we'd had for 14 years. Some of the decisions, starting with that winter fuel allowance and culminating in today, a man who's got a free house in London, who earns £168,000 a year, his wife earns £100,000, who has a £400,000 a year Director of Public Prosecutions pension, who is mollycoddled and looked after, is taking £25,000 in donations to buy suits and glasses and dresses for his lady wife, although he wants to abolish the House of Lords. How the hell does Keir Starmer seriously, or the idiots around him, Rupert Lowe, think that that's going to look to Beryl in Rochdale, who's going to be cold this winter? I don't get it. I don't.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre. And I think, you know, to see him accepting money for his wife's clothes, I mean, if I were him, I'd be embarrassed.
Yeah.
To have money paid for my own suits and my own glasses and my own makeover, equally embarrassing. I mean, this guy's not exactly, you know, poor. And the problem with this is if you accept large political donations, you become a hostage to fortune. You're in somebody's pocket. You owe them a favour. And there's a scandal about the person who actually paid for all this being given open access to Number 10. So, look, I mean, I don't think... I have to tell you, having been in Parliament, it's deeply depressing, Jeremy. It's a duopoly. The people in Parliament don't represent the majority of people throughout the country. As I've said in the past, I mean, London may be lost in terms of representing England or Britain, but there are some really good people in my constituency. There are in the West Midlands, there are across the north of England. And I don't think Parliament reflects the genuine decency of those people. I think it's now a self-serving sort of mess. And it's backed up by a civil service that's gone completely woke. People are working from home. They're not delivering. They're not accountable.
You know, what happened last year to me? I don't have your intelligence. I haven't got your experience. But I'm sat here doing the show last year, and somebody tells me about the civil service, and I've seen it back. My mouth drops open. So we're paying tax to employ civil servants to implement the rules of a democratically elected government. But because a bunch of bedwetting blob civil servants didn't like the Rwanda policy, in brackets, I didn't, but that was a democratically elected government's policy, close brackets, they then used taxpayers' money to take the government, who are democratically elected, to court to try and get it overturned. I'm sorry, I thought you were a pen pusher. I just couldn't understand it. Bizarre.
It's deeply worrying, Jeremy, and I think you only have to look. Matt Goodwin wrote a very good piece today about the John Lewis Group, which clearly has gone completely woke under the leadership of Sharon White, who was a civil servant. I mean, you only have to look at the example there. I mean, read Goodwin today, Matt Goodwin. He's written a fantastic piece. I actually said to my wife, I think we should stop shopping at Waitrose. I disagree with it so much, and hopefully other people might consider doing the same. It's clearly a malign group now, which is pushing all this woke nonsense. And, you know, how did Sharon White get the appointment? I don't know. Maybe it was Mayhew, her predecessor. I mean, the whole thing has been a financial disaster. And I think for a lot of people working there, it's an employment disaster now, reading Matt Goodwin's piece. So I think we're in deep trouble, and we need radical change. I'm becoming increasingly confident that we will win the election in 2029. We are representative of the real people. As you say, most of us have had jobs. I may be too old by then. I'm 66. I'm a pensioner myself.
Great,
now,
that's great. I'll be dead then, so that's great, isn't it? I'm almost.
But you know, I mean, maybe they won't hold it together for 5 years.
Listen, I'm not an expert, but if they will be battered in the May elections if they carry on like this. The optics are rubbish of so much. I don't know whether they think they've got this unassailable position. This is a one-term government right now. Can I read you just to finish? Thank you to Paul. He wanted me to read this to you, Rupert. Guys, I lost my job in the police for posting a joke on Facebook which had the word midget in it. My wife then lost a job because she would not have a COVID jab. And yet you can be a paedophile and get paid and keep a massive pension. What the hell has this country got to?
Question. I mean, I haven't had a COVID jab. I wouldn't touch the damn thing. And I think there was a lot of bizarre behaviour there. There's a lot yet to come out, rather like the post office, as we know, but for the tenacity and what decency of Mr. Bates, I think it would ultimately never have come out. And I suspect there's a lot more to come out over the COVID issue, not just the issue of the medical damage from the various jabs, but also the fraud that's taken place. I mean, the amount of money that's been misappropriated in bounce-back loans, Sybil's loans. It was a period, Jeremy, of complete madness, but bad decisions by the state. I must just tell you, depressingly, though, it's not just national government that's deficient. I'm afraid local government. You know, I learned quite a lot about it when I built the Southampton Stadium. That shocked me quite a lot. That was 24 years ago. But the more I see of local government, I think they forget the fact that they're elected by the people and they're paid by the people and they're supposed to be serving the people. But
what a shock that is. We say that, it's common sense, but my God. Rupert, a real pleasure, mate, and thank you so much for coming on. We'll have you on whenever you are free. Rupert Lowe, Reform MP.